Now we are live in YouTube. Welcome to this third session of the SDG Learning Center. I now pass the floor to Jenny, who will be leading us through the moderation of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and a warm welcome to you all, wherever you're joining, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jenny Eklund from the Partnering Initiative, and it's an absolute pleasure to be your moderator for this two-part session today, hosted by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, TPI, UNDESA, and the Zimbabwean government. We'll be delving into transformational partnerships, how we can make them happen at a country level, and crucially, how to meaningfully measure the added value created by multi-stakeholder partnerships. So we've split today's session into two to do each session justice, with a virtual coffee break in between, you'll be pleased to hear. And you'll see that this session is also being recorded today and will be available afterwards, should you wish to watch it back again. I'm delighted now to hand the floor to Ms. Julia Wegner, Head of Division Civil Society and Private Entities, to formally welcome us and open the session. Over to you, Julia.
Hello. Good morning. Do you hear me? Can you hear me?
Very well.
Yeah. Dear Permanent Secretary, dear other dignitaries, dear panelists, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to address you today representing the BMZ, that is the German Ministry for Development or for Economic Cooperation and Development. As I was introduced, my name is Julia Wegner. I am leading the Division Civil Society, Private Entities in the Ministry, and this division is inter alia responsible for any questions regarding multi-stakeholder partnerships within our house. The reason why we are so happy, or we were so happy to co-host this learning session, is that German Development Corporation deems multi-stakeholder partnerships promising means to enable profound social challenges. We are convinced by bringing together partners from civil society, government institutions, the business community, and academia, these partnerships can contribute to relevant changes in situations involving complex challenges. Challenges that cannot be adequately addressed by means of conventional projects. Working together as equal partners, parties coming from the different angles jointly elaborate solutions. This creates institutionalized partnerships to which all stakeholders contribute their experience and resources. Multi-stakeholder partnerships are not new for development cooperation in general, nor for German development cooperation in specific. But the Agenda 2030 stimulates MSPs as important instruments to reach the SDGs. Leave no one behind is the overarching slogan for the SDGs. Only together we can succeed could be the one for SDG 17. Since decades, German Development Cooperation engages in multi-stakeholder partnerships. To cite a few examples out of current some 80 multi-stakeholder partnerships, there is the German Sustainable Development Solutions Network, complicated name, the Partnerships for Sustainable Textiles, or the German Initiative on Sustainable Cocoa. Many of these partnerships are meant to contribute to the success of the new German Supply Chain Act. Moreover, German civil society organizations which plan to induce multi-stakeholder partnerships can receive funding if they're already experienced in conventional project implementation and trained in multi-stakeholder partnerships. Finally, BMZ funds GIZ for networking and consulting on multi-stakeholder partnerships within the program Platform 2030, the manager of which, Ms. Susanne Salz, will later introduce you to tools for measuring impacts of partnerships. Multi-stakeholder partnerships are relevant. However, they are complex structures to govern. The roads to impact can be winding and difficult to map. GIZ Platform 2030 was part of an action research that developed ways and tools to understand, capture, and communicate the impacts of a multi-stakeholder partnership. Dear all, I wish you a fruitful discussion which may help to enrich and improve transformative partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for setting the scene so well as we move into our first session. So without further ado, let's move into that. One of the key enabling mechanisms for partnerships to happen at country level is national platforms, able to engage stakeholders and catalyse partnerships around development priorities. These platforms can be set up by various different actors, whether business alliances or independent platforms or actors. But of course, government also has a lead role to play as a key implementer of the SDGs, and as Julia alluded to, ensuring that nobody is left behind. So I'm delighted that we are joined today by speakers representing several of these examples as we focus on a country case study from Zimbabwe. So we have Christy Davis, former Executive Director of Asia P3 Hub, Ms. Judith Cowlem, who's the Executive Director of the Poverty Reduction Trust and Coordinator of the Civil Society Organisations Reference Group on SDGs. And we're hoping that Mr. S. Masanga, who's the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, will be able to join us. I know he's had some technical difficulties joining, and we hope that he'll be able to drop in shortly. So I'm keen that we hear from all of you. And attendees, as you're listening, I've noticed that you've been introducing yourselves in the chat. That's fantastic. As you're listening to our speakers, please also do make use of the Q&A section. So as questions arise to you as you're listening, please do drop them in there. And when our speakers have finished, I will come to those Q&A and put them to the panelists. So as you're listening, if you want to put a question to a particular panelist, please put their name there so I know that's who you want to ask. Otherwise, I'll assume it's general. I'll ask our speakers to contribute for around 7 minutes or so, perhaps a little bit longer, as we're missing one of our panelists at the moment before we move to the Q&A. So if I can start by welcoming Christy Davis, former Executive Director of the Asia P3 Hub. Christy, if you'd like to introduce yourself to our panelists and attendees, and then share your experiences of national hubs. Over to you, Christy.
Wonderful. Jenny, thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there. It's an early morning here in the western side of the United States, and I'm just delighted to be with everyone here this morning, or today, I should say. It's especially a pleasure just to be to see TPI as well, who've been just an amazing partner for me and for the Asia P3 Hub over the years. And so I'm just delighted, Jenny, to see you, and Darian, to see you again. Yeah, so we had an amazing experience based out of Singapore to create something called Asia P3 Hub. At that time, I was living in Singapore. I was a long time resident of Asia, over 30 years, and just recently relocated to the US, where I am right now. And Asia P3 Hub, I've got a couple of slides, which I'll show here in just a moment, was a partnership incubation hub, and we focused on Asia. So you may be wondering, if we're here with Zimbabwe, why are we talking about Asia? But what was really interesting in the development of the concept to create a platform for partnering, we worked closely with some folks that were introduced to us through TPI, and they had a lot of experience with Africa. So a number of the examples of platforms and partnering initiatives and successful and unsuccessful brokering initiatives, we benchmarked and experienced ourselves and tapped ourselves for our experience. So really grateful for that. So hopefully that for those of you that are in Asia, I hope that you'll find that there's some things that are relevant for you. I do think so. So I'm going to, Jenny, I'm going to share my screen just to keep me on track here. So give me just a moment, everyone, and I'll put it up here. Am I good? Great. Okay, so just quickly, this is just to anchor a couple of remarks that I have, and using Asia P3 Hub as a case study. So what was Asia P3 Hub? We were, as I just said, a regional platform for multi-sector collaboration. We were based out of Singapore, but we covered more than 17 countries across Asia Pacific. We founded the hub, which we hadn't seen anything. There was a lot of incubators and accelerators in Asia, but we hadn't seen anything that was solely focused on brokering partnerships across the people, public, and private sectors. Our mission, as you can see there, was to tackle issues of poverty. And we focused kind of this new model just with water, sanitation, and hygiene. So we focused on SDG 6 as kind of our pilot issue area to see how as we were building up the hub, we built this from scratch, moving forward. So what did we offer? These were the services. We basically brokered multi-sector partnerships in 4 key ways. So matchmaking, obviously, you've got whether it's a community on one side or a government entity on one side and a business on the other side. We brokered those partnerships. We facilitated the process of co-creating solutions that were scalable. And we can talk more about that, obviously, and how do you define scale? And that comes into, expectations and language and all those kinds of things. Our third service was to tap in emerging market penetration, to help organizations penetrate new markets. So Asia, just as Africa, there's a lot of emerging markets. How do you get in? If you're a business, you want to do it the right way. It's working with communities as you're moving into those new countries. We were actually a facilitator and a broker to create the bridge into those new markets. And then finally, the capacity building capacity for partnering, for working across very diverse environments and different kinds of people and organizations, as well as I think encouraging an ecosystem, a dynamic ecosystem for partnering, one that was enabling and helpful to one another. So the first thing, it's why work with Asia P3 Hub. The first thing we found is as we were building this from scratch is we had to create a convincing a convincing narrative of why work with us. And some of you may have found that when you're describing multi-sector partnerships and the value of them and why they make good sense and how they can be vehicles to provide a frame for unconventional partnerships or to tackle really complex issues. And we're so passionate about it, but how do you communicate that to others in simple lay language, in language that they can understand? Because partnership seems so intuitive, and yet because it's so difficult, we found a lot of folks found it just kind of still rather innovative and like, oh wow, and I don't know what to do here. And so we definitely had to work on to be perfectly honest, on kind of how we marketed and put together our language to communicate what we did and why people should work with us. Why were we special? So these were some of the reasons that we posited that folks should work with Asia P3 Hub. So one was that we helped source solutions. And that was especially at the ground level. We were hosted, Asia P3 Hub was hosted by the large international NGO World Vision International. So we had access to a massive spread of communities and expertise across Asia. Second, we were able then to offer that we could access, reach, and build new markets across the region. Obviously, providing organizations access to the base of the pyramid countries. Third was obviously multi-sector partnership, brokering and facilitation across multiple countries. So this was especially valuable for multinational corporations or large organizations that had offices or presence in more than one country, and how could they actually navigate and coordinate across multiple countries. Fourth, to co-create sustainable and scalable solutions with different types of resource partners. So one we could introduce from our ecosystem, perhaps partners and resources that some of the partners within the partnership wouldn't have access to themselves, but it was all about, obviously co-creating that together. And then finally, we were very focused on kind of building visibility for the value of multi-sector partnerships. So we did a lot of ecosystem building, we called it. So in a nutshell, what did it take to actually build a partnership platform from scratch? One, as I just mentioned, got to have a clear value proposition. And for us was actually not as simple as one might think. We already had between the core team of the hub, We had 5 very different people, 5 different nationalities, different generation, and different networks ourselves as individuals, as well as the ecosystem we had from our host organization, World Vision, and the kind of the networks that already existed around us. So that was a huge resource for us as we were able to tap the different parts of our ecosystem across the region. And that was across the sectors. We had an executive sponsor with our host organization, World Vision, and that was our founding was a partnership with World Vision and also the government of Singapore. And so we managed and nurtured those relationships, but having that executive sponsor, someone greater than ourselves, that actually kind of had our back when others are like, you know, who are these guys and what are they doing? Someone that would go to bat for us was really important. Obviously, which SDG are we going to focus on? It was really easy because there's so, as we know, the SDGs are so interconnected, you know, and so it would be easy to say, well, what about there's poverty here and there's gender here but there's water over here. So we really focused on SDG 6 and SDG 17, obviously, and that was, you know, very prominent in our language. We had what we call stick-to-itiveness, which is actually a real word, was coined by Thomas Edison, I think, who invented electricity. But you know, you've got to stick to it. We had really, really difficult days and days where we felt that just nobody understood us and we felt like we were getting beaten down and things that you think were going to happen and didn't happen, or we'd hold an event and 2 people would show up, you know, this kind of thing. But everybody, the team, and we had this amazing team around us, we stuck together and we hung together and we encouraged one another. And I can't say how important the relationship across the team itself, those of us that were actually in the hub, the relationship that we had together was so important on the days when we just kind of thought, what are we doing? You know, we think this is so clear, you know, why is this so hard? Stick-to-itiveness. And finally, alchemy. Now, I know you probably most are thinking, wait a minute, isn't that, you know, magic, you know? And actually, if you look up the dictionary, and actually I did look it up again and I chose Oxford because I know Darian, you know, I think you're living in Oxford, so I thought Oxford was appropriate. But they define it as a seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or combination. And seriously, you know, there's all the nuts and bolts, you know, and there's all the processes and all of the really hard things that are really very, very process driven, lots of methodologies, you know, lots of, you know, figuring out how you're gonna, you know, the management process of it, your metrics, your finances. But at the end of the day, for us, there was an alchemy that had to be the fabric. There was something that was woven into the fabric, like gold thread woven into the fabric of everything we did. And there was this kind of spark that took place when we were all working together with our different partners. And you could see, and of course you're working with the people whose lives are going to change for the better. And they're part of that co-creation process. So for us, that magical process, that alchemic process was called combinatorial innovation, which it's just the pooling of resources in new and different ways. So you all come together with different strengths, different incentives, of course, but also different resources and strengths, and you pool them and you get a creative result that none of you could have produced on your own. So very important. So a couple just quick highlights from the team. This was at the end of 3 years. So we were active for 3 years. First year was building, getting ourselves situated. Second year was really and getting the team in place, building the relationships, figuring out what we were going to do, building some brand momentum. The second was really starting to broker partnerships. And the third was seeing the results of the partnerships that we had facilitated and brokered. In 3 years, we brokered 25 partnerships and directly impacted over 72,000 people in Asia, which, considering we started from scratch with no brand, we were pleased with seeing what was happening there. We saw the power of combinatorial innovation. We had massive satisfaction of seeing very practical innovation at the community level. What we found is sometimes those of us that were working at a regional level or an organizational level or speaking at even events like this, we think of innovation and it's kind of this, Silicon Valley sexy thing, there's got to be a lot of tech involved and that kind of thing, and it's shiny. But actually, when you are in a community that has previously had no access to clean, safe running water, and because you've worked together to create some kind of a solution that they can maintain and is sustainable, that's innovation, just right there in front of you. And that was the most amazing thing to see that at that place. So amazing. Partnership conversations that did not start with how much money do we have. A lot of times we start with, well, how much money do we have? Then we decide what we're going to do. Actually, it was the opposite. It was like totally, it was needs driven. What needs to happen here? Why do we need to be tackled? What's the problem to solve? Start with the problem. And then it's like, okay, here's the problem. Here's the impact of that problem. Here's the impact if we tackle it and solve it. Here's how lives can change at every level, community all the way to national. And then what do we need to make that happen? It's not just about it's not just about money. It's actually about all kinds of resources. So it was really stretching our brains to think very broadly about resources. And we found that people were and organizations were happy to barter. We leveraged the power of bartering hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth because people value different things and are willing to share. Another highlight was really learning ourselves constantly how the different sectors work. So we are driven by different interests and incentives, and building trust across and finding that sweet spot where we can live with the things that are not we don't agree on, but our vision and mission for what we want to accomplish together is complementary enough that we can work together and build trust to make that happen. Finally, we loved seeing the growth of the partnership ecosystem in Asia Pacific. And it's still growing. It's just, there's other incubators out there. There's so much work happening now across the sectors with the terminology cross-sector partnerships, multi-sector partnerships. Whereas when we were getting started, we had to explain what a sector was, in this case, and also what a partnership is. And so what is multi-sector? So we came a long way. So some of the challenges that we faced, the first was actually helping others catch the dream. So we did have, amazing backing from our partners, our partners, meaning our funding partners. But really challenging is when your number one backer gets a different job. So I would say you've got to make sure that your sponsorship, if you need that kind of sponsorship, and not just financial, those that have your back, those that are supporting you, make sure that if it's an individual or a department, make sure that that's a sustainable partnership as well internally. That's number one. How are you going to measure success? At the end of the day, what we found is that some of our key stakeholders at the end of the day just wanted to see what the ROI was. What's the return on the investment of this hub? Come on, why aren't you break even yet? So we had some very transactional questions asked of us in year 3 when we were actually just starting to really roll with the partnerships and the impact results were coming in. So you need to be really clear on how you're going to measure success and what that basket of impact and success metrics looks like and that you agree on. So that leads right to managing expectations from key stakeholders. It's making sure that you're aligned with your stakeholders that are supporting you and that you're working with, and that you understand what their expectations are so you don't get caught out. And then language. We used incubation hub in the beginning. Everyone thought we were an accelerator, like accelerating, startup businesses. And so we actually had to play with language so that we could make ourselves understood in the way we wanted to be understood, right? And then the second was obviously, as we've talked about many times in these different webinars and when we talk about partnerships, we talk differently across public, private, and civil sectors. And so how can we create language that's a bridge across the sectors, not an obstacle? So for example, even like you use short-term or long-term. What is short-term and what is long-term? What is medium-term? So finally, just to wrap up, after 3 years, we merged with an organization called Transformational Business Network Asia, TBN Asia, which is still going strong, does focus on social enterprise and supporting tackling poverty through enterprise. So it's really using the power of business and social businesses to tackle poverty. Asia P3 Hub, that brand, we are no more. We were subsumed, so it was a heartbreak for me. But it was an amazing 3 years. And one of the things that we did, we learned so much in that jam-packed time that the website, with the permission of TBN Asia, is still live. So if there's the link there. And last, we actually created what we call Hub in a Box. And so our Hub in a Box is a guide. It's basic. Do you want to build a partnering hub? From the experience that we have, so some of it may be a tad out of date, we actually put everything that we did in all kinds of categories, from the the back side, the back end side, to the front end side. We created a whole guide for it, and it's all online, and it's called Hub in a Box, and that's where you can find us. So Jenny, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you so much. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Christy, for sharing so much about the challenges as well as the successes of your program. I know people will really appreciate being able to learn from that. I'd like to hand over now to Mr. Simon Masanga, who's the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, to give us the view from the Zimbabwean government. I'd like to hand over to you, Mr. Masanga. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenny. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish to recognize you as our moderator. Then I wish also to recognize Hans Peter Bear and the previous speaker, Christy. New perspectives coming our way. I'm listening carefully here with my team and also our partners, who is going to be the next speaker. Judith Kaolema from the Poverty Reduction Forum. They are the coordinators of civil society, reference group on SDGs. We are really excited to be here to share the Zimbabwean experience on partnerships. And I really want to say we have really moved in leaps and bounds to also make sure that as a country, as we implement the SDGs, we also develop strong partnerships with everyone who is involved with SDGs in this country and beyond. In Zimbabwe, the 2030 agenda is being implemented through the national development plans. We have just adopted a new thrust in terms of economic blueprint, and we completed drafting our National Development Strategy 1, which will run from 2021 to 2025. Thereafter, we'll have a second 5-year National Development Plan running from 2026 to 2030. As a country, the Office of the President and Cabinet plays an oversight role, while my ministry, the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, is the lead ministry in coordinating the implementation of SDGs, supported by two key ministries of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Fisheries, and Rural Development, and also the Ministry of Health and Childcare. This is not a systematic arrangement per se, but we were looking at key ministries which could then give us greater dividends in terms of reaching out and achieving the targets set under the Sustainable Development Agenda. As a country, Cabinet decided to prioritize, mainly because of resource constraints, 10 priority goals. We call them 10+1. And quickly, I'll take you through the 10 prioritized goals. Goal number 8, 7, 2, 9, 6, 17, 3, 4, 13, 5, plus goal number 16. I was rushing for this meeting because we were in a meeting this morning in order to mobilize technical and financial support to child protection programs in order to achieve some of the targets set under goal number 16. Unfortunately, we are not able to share our presentation now because of technical challenges. In fact, we nearly failed to log into the meeting, but we will share the presentation later. Like I indicated, the program is being driven by Cabinet. And in order to enhance implementation, our Parliament has also taken on board the implementation of SDGs, at least as an oversight to the line ministries that are responsible for leading implementation. We have a parliamentary thematic committee on SDGs and a parliamentary expanded committee on SDGs. This one involves all chairpersons of the parliamentary portfolio committees so that we don't leave anyone behind. Our parliament is structured in such a way that they are responsible for certain functions of government, and these parliamentary committees then play an oversight role. Then we have Cabinet, which is the overall overseer, and under the Cabinet we have a steering committee, which is chaired by the Chief Secretary to the President and Cabinet. And we also have a technical committee where I chair, and my fellow permanent secretaries also participate at that technical level with the support of our focal persons. And as we do this, we don't leave anyone behind. Our development partners, civic society, and any other interested groups are also members of the various structures. We want to migrate to a more scientific approach in terms of clustering our SDGs. And this is already work that is underway. We want to come up with the environmental, social, and economic goals. And then the goal number 16 and 17, which has to do with the justice and also partnerships. But we are still to get the necessary authorities to do this, but that's the direction we are taking as a country. When we were developing the National Development Strategy #1, we carried out wide stakeholder consultations during this development. And I'm happy to share that our private sector, CSOs, the academia, development partners, faith-based organizations, and other stakeholders contributed in formulating NDS1. This is the first time that we embarked on this path as a country, and we have no regrets because everyone is happy. There have been consultations. Yes, it can't be 100% perfect, but efforts were made to involve everyone in the development of National Development Strategy #1. The NDS1 implementation and monitoring has its success hinged on strengthened partnerships. We continue to do so, and as a country, we have just finalized the Zimbabwe UN Sustainable Cooperation Framework, where we partner with the UN team and government on one side, and we will, in our thematic groups, continue to consult and involve everyone as we move along with the implementation of NDS1 and also implementation of the Zimbabwe United Nations Sustainable Development Framework. Regarding NDS1 monitoring, government is working together with the UN, the World Bank, African Development Bank, as well as civic society and the academia. As a government, we have adopted the whole of government approach. We were being affected by the silo approach. Now we have adopted, and it's working, the whole of government and the whole of society approaches, where we believe every ministry, every government department has something to contribute to the development of this country. And if we work together, we will then achieve greater results. The NDS1 has 14 thematic areas. It talks to infrastructure, economic development, and for me, I'm very particular with the 13th thematic group, which is to do with social protection, because in this ministry, we do a lot in terms of social protection. In line with the principle of leaving no one and no place behind, as enunciated in NDS1, thematic working groups put in place include various stakeholders, like I've already indicated, the private sector, CSOs, academia, youth, persons with disabilities, to mention just a few. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, SDGs monitoring and evaluation framework was developed to periodically track progress in the implementation of the SDGs. Government ministries, UN agencies, and I'll continue to repeat this because I want to emphasize the issue of sustainable partnerships. CSOs, private sector, and many other groups work together to input current data to the SDGs monitoring and implementation framework. Again, this was highly consultative. And as we continue to update and input to track progress in the implementation of SDGs, we get information and data and continue to work with everyone across the board. The framework, the monitoring and evaluation framework, is aligned to the national development plans and helps to track how development plans are contributing to the attainment of SDGs. NDS1 and SDGs alignment is being further strengthened. In fact, when we were coming up with the targets under the various thematic groups, we looked at SDGs as a cross-cutting issue. Every thematic group, whether economic, infrastructure, youth, you had to identify a goal that is linked to that structure, and also to make sure that the targets set under each goal find their way into the NDS framework. And we are doing this to ensure that as we implement NDS1, we also move toward the attainment of the targets and set under the SDGs. In 2021, with the assistance of UNDESA and the UN country team here in Zimbabwe, government and representatives from CSOs, persons with disabilities, youths conducted a session on the alignment of NDS1 to the SDGs. So it's fully aligned to NDS1, and we included everyone in this alignment to ensure that we don't leave any part of the global sustainable agenda outside of the NDS1. We also have focal persons from all the line ministries, and I want to emphasize that we have generated so much excitement as a country. What stops us from being in the United States of America, New York now, is we are awaiting our visas. We are taking quite a number of our focal persons to New York, and I'm sure by Friday we should be arriving in New York to share with the rest of the world the progress that Zimbabwe has made in the implementation of the SDGs. I now move on to look at voluntary national reviews. The government and stakeholders worked together in conducting the country's second voluntary national review in 2021. Yes, we engaged a consultant, but we worked closely with our partners to ensure that we produce a voluntary national review report that reflected the actual progress that we had made as a country. The 2021 VNR was a follow-up to the first voluntary national review that we presented in 2017. We are already making plans to prepare for our third voluntary review, and I'm sure in the next 2 years, we should be able to do this. The review covered all, despite the COVID, the pandemic that affected us just like any other country in the world, we covered all the 17 SDGs, and the report is available for sharing, and I think it's online as well. But we specifically focused on the SDGs that were under discussion at the high-level political forum in 2021. We have also adopted voluntary local reviews. The best way to capture what is happening at local levels are the voluntary local reviews. And we have invested heavily as a country in this process. We hosted the Africa Forum for SDGs, which is a UNITAR-driven program in 2020, just before the onset of COVID. And we had about 3,500 delegates converging in Victoria Falls. And this then set the pace for us to implement local reviews, starting with pilot local reviews for Victoria Falls and Harare. And I really want to appreciate the efforts of the Minister of Local Government, who is really pushing this program forward. When the reports were presented to Cabinet further directed that these be cascaded to all local authorities. So the government is currently working with the UN country team, UNDESA, CSOs, and all the other stakeholders to make sure that we extend our voluntary local reviews to 4 additional districts of the country, 2 urban and 2 rural, so that we strike a balance. Thereafter, we'll continue to roll out this program to the other local authorities of this country. Successes. Partnerships are bearing fruit in fostering sustainable development in this country. In fact, I will refer to the meeting that we had this morning. We were working with the Minister of Finance because it's about mobilizing financial resources. We had a representative from the Minister of Finance. My minister was there. We had the regional director for UNICEF, having traveled all the way from Kenya, Nairobi. We had the UNICEF country representative, and I think it was the entire office. And we also had private sector sitting together with government to see how we can mobilize resources towards programs of child protection in this country. This is how seriously we look at partnerships. Major achievements in Zimbabwe included the partnerships to recover from the devastating effects of Cyclone Idai, which affected this country, where roads were rehabilitated, clinics were constructed, sanitation facilities. In fact, the cyclone was so destructive, but working together with stakeholders and partners, we were able to rehabilitate the districts that were affected by Cyclone Idai, and we achieved the goal of building back better, because Chimanimani and Chipinge are now totally different, and you cannot recognize that these areas were affected by a major cyclone. The achievements of the country in the fight against COVID-19 is another example where partnerships are producing positive results. Zimbabwe, the impact of COVID in this country was minimized because people were able to work together to come up with mitigation programs. And we lost a few lives because of the partnerships that were generated. Victim-friendly courts were also established through government partnerships with the development partners, particularly to make sure that women and children are protected. What are the benefits? The multi-stakeholder partnerships have generated transformational change in Zimbabwe. They facilitated input from many different sectors, leading to richer and inclusive development processes. Burden sharing, we don't have adequate resources as a government, but when you are structured in such a way that you consult and involve partners in implementation, they are able to bring in additional resources, therefore reducing the burden on government. Widened skills and expertise base. We have expertise in the PVO, private voluntary organizations, NGOs, in the private sector, in development partners. And when we come together to plan and implement programs, the results become richer because of that partnerships. Again, improve the resource mobilization because you are now reaching out to far and wide. How do we make partnerships effective? Partners need the space and opportunity to provide input and discuss and give input to discussions and processes. If you crowd out partners, they will not add value to our processes. And we continue to open space for all partners to operate and participate in the development agenda of Zimbabwe. We also want to allow partners to be responsible for some deliverables for buy-in and accountability. If you task partners to do this and that, they then are certain that there is accountability in government, there is transparency, and you get a better buy-in from them. They also provide something in return so that it's mutually a beneficial arrangement for all involved. So respect for each other and also opening up to each other will eventually benefit our development agenda. And communication is key. Regular coordinatory meetings where we meet together, assess progress, monitor, joint monitoring, and implementation of programs, again, will enhance partnerships. And we are able to set clear roles and responsibilities thereby avoiding duplication of efforts. And finally, I want to look at challenges. Number one, the COVID-19 pandemic, which reversed most of the achievements that we had made in attaining the targets set for the country and under the global and the continental AU Agenda 2063. Secondly, insufficient, timely, and disaggregated data for most indicators. When we started implementing SDGs, we were below 50% in terms of data availability. We continue to work together with the statistical agency, and each SDG goal has a focal person within the statistical office in order to improve on data availability through surveys and researches. Number three, inadequate resources for the implementation and monitoring of SDGs implementation is another challenge. And lastly, low levels of awareness on SDGs, and we are on a drive to popularize SDGs in the country. I thank you. I know I've taken a bit more time, but I thought you needed to hear the Zimbabwean story, Jenny, but I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Basanga, for sharing that depth of context with us. It's been very, very interesting. I'd like to pass now to Ms. Judith Cowlem, who is the Executive Director of the Poverty Reduction Trust and Coordinator of the Civil Society Organisations Reference Group on SDGs. Judith, very much looking forward to what you have to share with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you for having me. We do appreciate that for the SDGs to be achieved, their localization has to be conceptualized in a holistic manner to include all stakeholders, creating the essence for partnerships and ensuring that no one then is left behind. So as civil society organizations in Zimbabwe that are pushing for the implementation of the SDGs, we believe that coordination of our efforts would make engagement and collaboration among ourselves, and more importantly, with government, more effective. So as such, in 2017, which is the year that the government of Zimbabwe presented its voluntary national review, the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, which is the organization that I direct, we spearheaded the formation of the Zimbabwe Civil Society Reference Group on SDGs, whose membership include apex bodies across sectors, including people with disabilities, the elderly, youth, children, women, the religious, media, and human rights. And each of these apex organizations have membership that goes down to grassroots across the country. And each of those members actually have focus on specific SDGs. So essentially all the 17 SDGs, when we begin to talk about it together, data civil society are covered in that way. And the formation of this reference group really was out of the learning that we had with experience during the Millennium Development Goals, where as civil society, essentially we worked in a very siloed approach. It made it difficult even to engage government, even to have our position ahead. So we realized it's important that we have to be organized. And we believe that the government has found it easier to engage civil society around the SDGs through this platform, which it has also invited to be part of the SDG structures that Mr. Masanga was speaking to, especially the SDG Technical Committee, where we also sit as the reference group and the various civil society organizations. In both 2017 and 2021, which are the years that the government presented the voluntary national reviews, the reference group, which constitutes all these bodies that I've spoken to, was able to gather citizens' views through the spotlight reports. So in both years, we used the platform to get citizens' views to then use to contribute towards the voluntary national review that the government was presenting. And in terms of ensuring that we bring everybody on board, we were using the tool, the People's Scorecard. So it rallied everybody together, and we garnered our views that we then used for the Spotlight report. And in 2021, as the COVID-19 restrictions made it difficult to physically engage citizens towards data gathering for the voluntary national review, the civil society reference group became handy because then it used its members' existing structures to get down to the grassroots, to get the voices of the people, even without physically engaging, visiting the communities. And so we believe that the reach for the voluntary national review through the input of the Spotlight report was broadened in that way. And that data actually enriched the voluntary national review that the government shared with the globe. And through the civil society reference group on SDGs, we complement government efforts through various actions, including continuing to raise awareness on the SDGs. Yes, we are 8 years into the Agenda 2030, but there are still pockets of the population who probably have not heard about the SDGs. So through using various platforms and mediums of communication, civil society will contribute in making ordinary citizens aware of the SDGs. So it does enable their participation in the related processes. We continue to advocate for the localization of the SDGs. We have to demystify sometimes the language alienates people, but through our work, we then help to localize the SDGs. We continue to engage in participatory citizen monitoring of the SDGs and also complementing government efforts through resource mobilization. We are aware and acknowledge that government resources alone will not be able to achieve the SDGs. And the work of civil society organizations in Zimbabwe is largely supported by donor partners. So through fundraising for the work that we do, civil society contributes towards then addressing the development gaps that are there, especially around service delivery. I know we are running out of time and I'm going to be the savior here. So I'm actually going to conclude. And allow me to conclude by probably stating a couple of recommendations that also speak to the challenges that we have experienced as civil society organizations who are trying to run a coalition or this platform. Currently in Zimbabwe, and I guess elsewhere, the donor funding is shrinking and civil society organizations are chronically underfunded. And we believe that for civil society to be more effective as a partner in the SDG implementation, there's really need for more investment towards civil society work. Investment that is long-term as opposed to short-term funding. What we have experienced with the reference group is in the years that the government has been doing the voluntary national review, there has been some level of uptake of our requests for support from funding partners, but that has been direct support and very short term just for that activity. And then to us, that sounds like a box ticking exercise. So it would be important to have long-term support that then empowers civil society to be able to be the complementer that we are saying to what government is doing, because we have to increasingly be able to produce evidence to speak to what is happening on the ground, since most civil society also work on the grassroots. And maybe another recommendation to government is that it is important that civil society work free from undue restrictions. Government is expected to create a conducive operating environment without repressive legal frameworks. So the civic space has to be guaranteed so that civil society can continue to be a partner that complements what government is doing. Because I strongly believe that partnerships should be built on mutual trust and mutual respect, and that we move away from the negative narratives that we sometimes tend to create around each other, so that together we ensure that we leave no one behind. Thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you very much, Judith, and to Mr. Masanga and to Christy as well for an excellent set of interventions. We are sadly running out of time. I'm glad we used all that time to hear what you had to say, but it means we don't have so much time for questions before we move into our break. But what I would like to do is to hear from the three of you briefly, if you can. There will be people on this call thinking about what could a national platform for partnerships do in my country. If I were to set it up, what would I need to think about? And I wondered, from each of your perspectives, if you could go back and speak to yourself 10 years ago, what would you say is important to consider, most important to consider when you're setting up a national partnership platform or partnerships at national level that perhaps you wish that you had known? And can I start with Christy, please?
And you want a brief response to that? That's just cruel, Jenny. That's cruel.
Isn't that mean?
This is a whole nother webinar topic. Actually, I'm sure that Mr. Masanga and Judith would concur on this. Actually, I referenced it briefly. I would say I wish I had known how absolutely make or break important my executive, I would say sponsors, but that's probably not entirely correct. That executive sponsors, those that had power over us for whatever reason, whether it was regulatory or financial, or just actually even hosting us. We ran into, once those folks that were like-minded with us, and they were like, yes, Asia P3 Hub, you're onto this idea here. At that time, we were just an idea, right? And it's like, okay, go for it. And I really concur with what Judith said. You've got to have this long-term view. You think about funding cycles. Okay, here's a 3-year grant. You're just getting up and running and just starting to show a bit of a return on what you're setting out to do. And then it's like, wait a minute, what happened to my 3 years? I need more time. So I think having the courage for long-term funding with appropriate checkpoints and milestones and all of that, but make sure that whoever is backing you, and I use the word backing really broadly, I wish I had been savvier in really anticipating what would happen if some of those key individuals that were our champions were no longer there, because that was very problematic when that disappeared.
Great, thank you, Christy. Judith, if we could come to you next, because Christy mentioned the importance of the long-term view, which is something that you really emphasized as well. Is there anything else you want to add, perhaps that you wish that you had known when you embarked on this journey?
Actually, I want to do the opposite, and something that I will do more of, which I learned through the process, which was building relations, health relations. In our case, at the start of the SDGs were actually being coordinated by a different ministry, and we developed relationships. So even when they moved to the Ministry of Public Service, where Mr. Masanga is, we have continued to build health relationships as civil society, so it helps to then engage. Yes, we have no control as civil society over long-term or short-term funding, but it's something we had always known, that if the cycle we have is 3 years, we might not control it. But for me, and bringing together civil society that are like-minded, like Christy has said. So for me, really, it's what I would do more of, to build healthy relationships with all the key stakeholders, especially with the government. And for us, we think it is really working in that way.
Great, thank you so much, Judith. Relationships, trust just come through so strongly when we talk about partnerships, don't they? Mr. Masanga, can I come to you, please? Is there anything that you would advise if you were speaking to a fellow government worker in another country and they were embarking on this kind of work?
Thank you so much, and a very, very relevant issue that you are raising to me. And I'll give you a practical response. We are coming from a transition from one government to the other. We had Robert Gabriel Mugabe for a long time as the president of this country. Now we have His Excellency Comrade Emerson Mnangagwa. And the approaches are totally different. When I started working for government, it was taboo to talk to civic society. It was taboo to go to a development partner office. We looked at ourselves as those who knew it all. We looked at ourselves as the drivers of this economy and the development agenda. And I'm sure little success was achieved. When the new dispensation came into office, and this was in 2018, they opened up space for us technocrats to go into partnerships. And thereafter, we have developed in leaps and bounds. I was talking to the Minister of Finance just yesterday, and he's indicating that because of the National Development Agenda, NDS1 that I was talking about, even with COVID and the drought that we experienced last year, we are able to record 4% economic growth to the GDP. And this is the power of partnership. But what do you need to make these partnerships work? You need to be sincere, you need to believe, you need to build the trust. And I think slowly we are beginning to do this as a country. When I started working with Lema, it wasn't easy. We lacked the trust, but slowly we are working together. And just before,
Sorry.
You are muted, Mr. Masanga.
did you hear anything?
We heard most of it. It was just the last couple of seconds that you were muted.
I think someone muted. So I'm simply saying partnerships do work. I am also responsible for labor administration in this country. We meet often as government, business, and labor. We have strengthened the tripartite negotiating forum to the point that we are now appointing an independent secretariat for the TNF so that we build trust, so that people realize that we are neutral as a ministry. So I really wish we had started this journey 10 years ago, because there is power in partnerships. We will achieve more, you benefit more, you learn more from those around you, and it exposes you to other areas that you may not have been privy to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that's a fantastic note to finish on. I wish we had time to ask you more questions. Panelists, thank you very much again for your frankness and the richness of the content that you've been able to share with us. I'm going to suggest now that we move into a short break, and if it's okay with all of our attendees and panelists, I'm going to cut that to 5 minutes to make sure everybody has a chance to have a quick drink and come back refreshed for our second session. So can I ask you to come back in 5 minutes, please? So that would be 9:30, or coming at 9:41 US EDT. So in 5 minutes, we'll reconvene and we'll welcome Darian Stibbe and Susanna Solfs. Thank you. Right, welcome back everybody. And if you've just joined us, welcome to the session on transformational partnerships, national platforms and tools to promote collaboration. My name is Jenny Eklund. I work for the Partnering Initiative. And if you weren't here for the first session, you missed a treat, but don't worry because it's been recorded and you can go back and listen afterwards. We had some great insights in the last session into the power of partnerships at country level. It's clear that they're seen as an essential enabler of the SDGs, albeit one that has its own challenges. And our panelists were very frank about what those challenges were and how they overcame them. And over the course of our work, TPI has found that few partnerships are particularly rigorous in measuring exactly how partnerships generate value, such that they deliver more than the sum of their parts. Christy, one of our panelists, used a wonderful term earlier. She talked about the alchemy of partnerships, which made me think, goodness, how on earth do you measure alchemy? Both TPI and Partnerships 2030 have been examining this issue. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Darian Stibbe, Executive Director of TPI, and Ms. Susanna Sals of Partnerships 2030 to delve into this in a bit more detail for you. So in a moment, I will pass first to Darian, then to Susanna to introduce themselves properly and their approach to understanding and measuring the value add of MSPs, multi-stakeholder partnerships. As per the previous session, please do feel free to post questions either in the Q&A box, or if you haven't got access to that, I understand some people don't, then you can post questions in the chat. As we go along, I'll pick those up when both the speakers have finished and we'll put them to the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to pass first to Dr. Darian Stibbe. Over to you, Darian.
Many thanks, Jenny, and a real pleasure to be here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you happen to be. And yeah, what a fascinating panel. Thank you so much to all the previous panelists. That was really, really interesting hearing about some of the challenges and opportunities and approaches to be able to deliver national platforms. And of course, as you sort of spoke, Jenny, one aspect of that is trying to ensure that the partnerships that one is creating are indeed creating as much value as they possibly can. The challenge is that, of course, we talk about partnerships, we say, yes, of course, partnerships are a great idea. The reality is that many partnerships simply are not delivering sufficient benefits, value, more than the sum of the parts. And the reason why this is so important is because partnerships take a long time. They are often quite messy. You have to sort of align the interests of multiple different organizations, bring them together, try and find ways in which collectively they're able to deliver things they couldn't do alone. If partnerships are going to take their rightful place as an essential mechanism to deliver the SDGs, we all need to be far better at both measuring and maximizing the value that's created by partnerships. I'm going to talk briefly about how partnerships can create value and just introduce a framework and a tool to help people look at certain forms of partnerships. And then Susanna is going to be then talking about sort of multi-stakeholder partnerships, more sort of transformational multi-stakeholder partnerships from the Partnership 2030 perspective. Let me just share a couple of, or a few slides. And as I mentioned, the whole point about these collaborations, these partnerships, is we're able to bring together the resources from multiple different sectors to be able to deliver towards the SDGs in ways that simply couldn't be done from one sector's particular position. And these collaborations can really happen where there's three things in place. The first one is that there's sufficient alignment of interest amongst the partners. There's a reason why they would come together, and for whatever that might be. Let's say it's around skills building, that we know that business needs certain skills within a growing workforce. We know that governments and NGOs are all about potentially building up skills of individuals to improve livelihoods. There's an alignment of interest there, and then we can create a compelling vision between partners that, for example, would be about building up the skills of workforces that government, further education colleges, working together with businesses, providing curricula and trainers, etc., could work together to create these, to really sort of build up a skilled workforce. And that creates net value for all partners. So every partner wants to be involved because they're gaining value from it. So when we look at this sort of the partnerships, just to mention one thing, there are multiple different types of partnerships. And it's just worth categorizing them a little bit. So we have what we talk about, these leverage exchange partnerships, and that might be where we're trying to find a way for another organization to contribute resources to our organization so we can do our work more effectively. And that could be anything from, that could be a UN agency getting data from a university, which then supports their work. Great. Next level up, though, gets a bit more interesting. This is where, by combining resources in different ways, we are able to then deliver more than sum of the parts. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on, is these combine, integrate partnerships. And as I mentioned, then there are these also these system transformational partnerships that can genuinely try to shift a system from a less sustainable to a more sustainable approach, using the multiple different levers that different societal sectors can bring to the table, and using multiple of these, actually these combine integrate partnerships, as you'll see in just a moment. So the trick is, we want to create as much value in our partnerships as possible. We want our 1 + 1 to equal 5. So what do we need to do to maximize value creation? Well, I would say that in the first instance, we need to really understand how partnerships create value, and therefore be able to design our partnerships to potentially create as much value as possible. Then, as we are implementing our partnerships, we need to be able to monitor and monitor the value that's being created, in order then to be able to iterate where necessary to again optimize and ensure maximum value creation. And then finally, at the end of it all, we need to be able to ensure that we can measure the total added value of the partnership. We don't have to work in partnership. There are other ways of working. We need to be able to demonstrate that partnerships genuinely are able to deliver more. So let's just talk about this value creation. I'm going to introduce this two concepts. One is a collaborative advantage, and the other one is this idea of a partnership difference, the partnership delta. What have we been able to achieve because we worked in partnership that we couldn't have been able to achieve on our own? And this is where we have something of a framework to talk about collaborative advantage and this partnership difference, this partnership delta, in terms of the different ways that partnerships can create value for these combine, integrate partnerships. So let me just give you an example. This is the framework for collaborative advantage and partnership difference. And as I said, the collaborative advantage, that's the intrinsic reason why you would choose a partnership approach, why we come together in the first place. And the partnership delta, just to repeat, is the additional impact you're able to deliver through a partnership approach. So let's have a look at some of these different ways. Well, the first one, or the first two, is really about this idea of complementarity. And that's about being able to bring together the different jigsaw puzzle pieces that allow you to achieve something or do something you just simply couldn't do on your own. So let's just take, for example, there's an initiative called Banking on Change, which is around bringing rural areas access to low-cost banking. And that's banking both savings as well as loans, potentially insurance, etc. Now, this is in highly rural areas in East Africa. And what this partnership did is it brought together Barclays Bank, which of course knows all about banking and has got its banking services and technologies. But of course, they don't know how to work in really rural areas which don't have electricity even. Whereas their partners, Care International, Plan International, know all about this. And they know about working with these communities and how best to structure things and bring in the voices of the communities to help the communities design. And collectively together, they brought together the banking expertise and the knowledge of communities and engagement with communities to be able to create a solution that just simply wouldn't be possible. And it's quite an innovative solution. This is the second one, about the fact that you're able to combine these diverse resources, diverse thinking and approaches, new technologies, for example, combined with social capital, combined with user-centric design. We can collectively deliver this collaborative advantage of innovation. And what that does is that leads to new solutions that can deliver ongoing value, ongoing benefit, ongoing impact. That's the partnership delta. A couple more. So another one is around standards. So a lot of partnerships can be around developing new standards that can really sort of raise whole sectors. So for example, the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, which was developed after the terrible fire at the Rana Plaza manufacturing factory. And what this did was it brought together the purchasers, the brands, alongside the manufacturers, alongside trade unions, alongside government, to collectively develop this accord. And what this accord does was basically around raising standards within factories. Now, if anyone on their own tried to do this, tried to sort of instill these sort of standards across the board, then there are two things. Firstly, they wouldn't have necessarily had the legitimacy. This has to be something where we all agree collectively together. But secondly, they may not even have the knowledge about the reality on the ground. And so partnerships, the added value created is that we can have that knowledge, we can have that legitimacy, and we can have that buy-in that means genuinely we can push these standards. So the point being that what we're doing in all of these different things is we are explicitly identifying why it is that we are working with certain partners. And we can go through each of these different collaborative advantages, each of these different partnership values, added value that's being created, in order to really understand and maximize that value. So when you're talking with partners, you can actually go through literally all of these different types of value creation and see where is it that collectively we can increase the benefits of this partnership. And just to give you sort of the final one, the example here is around critical mass. And this, for example, if you're trying to introduce advocacy for government, or you want some sort of behavioral change, for example, around healthy eating, then if you can bring together the various players so that for example, that schools can have campaigns for healthy eating in the classroom, so that you can have supermarkets having healthy campaigns when people are going and buying, so that you can have in every health center, you have promotions on healthy eating, etc., then that critical mass itself can deliver change that simply wouldn't be possible elsewhere. The point being is we need to identify it at the beginning of our partnerships and to really understand what is the value that can be created through collaboration. And this is where there are these tools that I'll just briefly mention from this guidance, maximizing the impact of partnerships through the SDGs. And they start with the first level of being clear about what the collaborative advantage is, and therefore what is that extra value that is going to be created through the partnership, that partnership difference. And here you need to understand how and what it looks like if you are successful. So for example, if you are the advocacy partnership, the one about trying to have or behavioral change for healthy eating, then some of the indicators would be that there would be, you'd get multiple different organizations, multiple different ways of reaching people to sign up and be delivering these advocacy messages. So that would sort of be one indicator that along the way of some sort of output that you've collectively got this. Of course, then you have to have indicators around the behavioral change, but in terms of the collaborative advantage, the indicator is multiple different organizations all pushing the same messages. And so at the beginning of the program, you need to understand what is success, or what are the indicators that shows that you are on the right route. And also, what needs to be in place in order to ensure you are going to deliver on this collaborative advantage. Then as you are developing, or as you're delivering the partnership, you can really look at your progress against those indicators. You can see the number of different organizations and voices that are spreading the same messages. You can also begin to look at the indicators in terms of the impact that are people beginning to change their shopping habits. Another good reason for engaging with a supermarket is you get the data from a supermarket, for example. And then you might adjust and adjust as you go. You might realize that actually one of your routes just simply is not creating any value at all. And so that you might adjust and change in order to go to different routes. Finally, at the end point, it's around the review to really understand, okay, we said we were going to try to create this value, this additional value. Are we achieving it? Have we achieved it? How has partnership been able to create more than the sum of the parts? So this is just some very simple tools, a framework to really understand how partnerships create value, about how they can deliver impact that is more than the sum of the parts. And the point about it is just be very conscientious and deliberate about understanding how you can create value and use the tools to ensure that you continue to maximize and optimize the value that's being created as you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darian. Excellent. I would like to pass now directly to Susanna to move on from that and talk to us about what some of the tools are for measuring the impact of partnerships. Over to you, Susanna.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So my name is Susanne Salz, and I'm working at GIZ, Germany's International Cooperation Agency, heading a project called Partnerships 2030 that is all about multi-stakeholder partnerships. And today, building on what Darian and the other panelists have said, I would like to share some work we've done about understanding and measuring the value add and impact of partnerships. Because if you work in partnerships, the question is, what's really the added value of working together as opposed to going it alone? So I will give you a bit of introduction and then talk about a shared intention, realizing work in the partnership, and then capturing that impact. And finally, a few concluding remarks. So we all know that multi-stakeholder partnerships relate to all SDGs, but in particular, SDG 17 partnerships for the goals, where multi-stakeholder partnerships are actually mentioned. And Darian showed us a nice spectrum about different types of partnerships. And what I will present here, I think, works to some extent for different kinds of partnerships. And you can think through if it's helpful for you, of course. So as I mentioned, the question is, how can we track in how far cooperating in a partnership is actually helpful and adds value, like the partnership delta that Darian was mentioning. So for that, we looked particularly at the partnership level. So the impact that everybody is achieving together. It can be in addition to things that are achieved individually or at the organizational level or at the sectoral level, but here it's particular about the partnership level. And in our work with many different partnerships, we realized that this question comes up time and again. So the past 2 years, we worked with 9 particular partnerships or MSPs, and with a university in the Netherlands, the Partnerships Resource Center of the Rotterdam School of Management, to develop actually new guidance and tools to better understand, capture, and communicate MSP impact. And that is what I will be presenting today. And of course, it's also available online. So if you want to use it later, it's there for you to do that. We set out with this visual and this idea of, I skipped a slide, sorry, it's a bit slow. We use the visual of going on a hike together. So you have a starting point where different partners get together. This might be government, NGO, business, maybe some kind of secretariat or backbone organization, maybe others depending on the case. And you decide to go on a hike together. So to say, you want to reach a results peak together. And then the first question is, how do you want to get there? And how do you want to track how you're making progress? Do you want to try and assess impact along the way? So figuratively speaking, if the weather is nice, take a break, enjoy the view. If there's a rainstorm coming, take more shelter and adjust how you do and how you track what you do along the way. Or are you really quite focused on that peak? And you want to try and get there as fast as possible, rain or shine, rain or sunshine or whatever, you just keep going. Might be more exhausting. It's just a different approach. And it's, in our experience, helpful to be quite clear which route everybody wants to take, because if half the group goes one way and half the group goes the other way, that might not be so easy. We also saw with a lot of partnerships, the results peak is actually a bit in the mist. It's foggy. You don't quite know which peak you're heading to. Maybe there's a plateau and one of these peaks you want to get to, but which one is it exactly? So to refer to Darian's example, if we're talking about healthy eating, is it particularly in schools that you want kids to eat healthy, or is it also at home or in canteens in the work environment? Might be things like that where actually it's not quite clear what exactly you want to achieve together, And it might be helpful to clarify that so that you can really actually make good progress together. So once you've decided what is your joint impact intention, then how can you track that? And this is where we came up with this impact pathway, as we call it. And what this does is it's a bit similar to approaches like a theory of change, but it's more simple. And yet, as you can see, when you look at this, it's not that simple, but with a bit of explanation, I think it's quite doable. So what we would recommend is to use this template and sit together with the different partners that you are working with in a partnership, and then go through from the top to the bottom. So what are the inputs? What are the resources you have? Do you have money? Do you have people? Do you have reputation? Things like that. And just to be clear, what is it we actually have to work with? And then what are the activities and outputs? So what actions are you taking? What work will you perform together? Who will do it? And so on. And that leads on to immediate outcomes. So short-term things, maybe increased awareness, knowledge, skills, access. So if we take the healthy eating example, maybe there's posters in the school that inform about the need for healthy eating and the benefits of healthy eating and things like that. Those would be immediate outcomes. And those over time lead to intermediate outcomes. So midterm changes in behavior, for example. So might be in the example, the kids start to eat more healthy food more often, which is of course desirable. And that in the even longer term leads to ultimate outcomes. So more healthy kids, because they're eating more healthily over months, over years, over generations, that increases the general health. And that finally in the impact leads to better health of the population overall. Maybe the kids even at home talk to their parents, hey, actually, let's try and eat more healthy meals, and so on. And this, as the arrows you see there indicate, is also iterative. So the outcomes feed back to activities. Maybe, I don't know, the parents hear from the kids about healthy eating and they introduce it at their workplace or such. So it's not such a linear process, but it goes back and forth as well. And what's important to realize for you as an organization and as an individual working in a partnership here is that you have a sphere of control where you and your partners actually control what happens. And then there's a sphere of influence, things you can influence, but you cannot quite control. And that helps to keep in mind for how to plan your actions and interventions. And finally, there's a sphere of interest. So the final impact that you wish to have is relevant to you, it's of interest to you, but you can't directly influence it. And then the final thing I want to mention here is what you see in the bottom left corner, so the impact levels. Are you trying to impact individuals? So an example, individual kids to change their behavior and eat more fruit and vegetables? Or do you want to influence the organization? So the school, for example, and what they provide in their canteen. Or do you want to influence the whole partnership? So maybe the school is cooperating with the education ministry, with some NGOs and some businesses, and you want to influence the whole partnership to move forwards together, or even the whole sector. So you want to influence all schools or the whole education sector or the whole food production system or something like that. And the biggest sector you want to influence in the end, the societal sector. So how everybody eats anywhere, not just in school, for example. And again, to be clear, which of these levels are you aiming for actually helps, hopefully, to actually achieve the changes and the impact that you're wanting to achieve, that you're intending. And then my last main slide is how do you then capture that? So you've realized what is your intended impact, what are the inputs, activities, and so on. But then what? Then maybe your donors ask you, okay, now we've been giving you money for 3 years, or your partners ask, well, we've been cooperating for a couple of years. What's happened? Can you prove what changes there are? And here it's helpful to have indicators at the partnership level. So I just mentioned the different levels from the individual all the way to societal. And here we're looking in particular at the partnership level. And previous panelists also mentioned the importance of relationships, of trust. So these things to some extent can be measured, maybe via a questionnaire. And then you can show, okay, trust has really improved over the past few years, and that helps us move forward together. Or ownership, people really come to our meetings and they consider them important and they realize that that's helpful. Things like that. And how can you measure such things? You can do surveys, either online or in person or both, of course. And you can reach many people with a survey, depending on what kind of survey, with what kind of questions. In addition, we found that it's helpful for many partnerships to use impact stories. So to do an interview and then create a credible story based on the interview and maybe a survey, but that really tells the story. So it's not just data and facts and figures, but you can make it more personal. So in our example, it might be a story of one school or even one child or one family and how their behavior changed and why they now eat more healthily and what the benefits are and things like that. And then why does it help if you do these things that I just mentioned? Well, you can then better communicate the impacts of your partnership. You can see, is it actually helping that we're cooperating as a partnership? You can talk more convincingly about the results you're achieving. And also you can learn. So you can build in feedback mechanisms where maybe the partnership can do something even better to achieve even more impact even faster. So in conclusion, doing what I've just outlined takes time and takes effort, but it's worth it because it, in our experience in the partnerships we worked with, it supports a better understanding of and dealing with the complexity that you have in any partnership, because you have many people working together from different backgrounds, working on a complex topic, and it's just not so easy. It also stimulates discussion on the direction and priorities of the MSP's impact. So if you think about that peak, when you're more clear on which mountain you actually want to climb, it's more likely you will get there in the end. It also provides entry points for identifying and prioritizing indicators. So how to actually measure the progress exactly. Sorry. So if these resources might be helpful to you, I've put here the internet address, the URL where you can find them. And you can also contact us at the email address mentioned there if that might be helpful for you. Thank you very much, Jenny. And with that, back to you. And I think we have time for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Darian and Susanna, for those interventions. I would like to invite everybody listening, if you have questions, please do put them into either the chat box or the Q&A section at the bottom, and I will pick them up from there. And while we're waiting for people to do that, I'm going to take moderator's privilege, and I'm going to direct a question for Darian and also for Susanna. So firstly, Darian, you spoke about the opportunity, that prime opportunity to design the partnership from the beginning to maximize value, to think about it at the beginning. There'll be many people listening to this presentation who are maybe a year or so into a partnership and thinking, we didn't really think about this at the beginning. Is it too late? Can you reverse engineer?
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, I'd say that an essential part of running effective partnerships is to have some level of review, ongoing review of your partnership pretty much all the time as you go, in order to be able to then sort of iterate it in order to ensure you're able to deliver and indeed maximize value. So yeah, you can go through this process even if you're already in a partnership. In fact, we've seen that happen really well, almost as a review of the partnership. We've seen partners working together, going through the 10 different types of partnership added value, seeing the degree to which they are applicable to their partnership, the degree to which they are working towards those, and then identifying new ways in which they could potentially create new value together. So absolutely, yes, use it at any point.
That's good to know. Thank you. And Susanna, as I was looking at your presentation, I was thinking, what would you do if you were a small partnership that was putting all your resources into implementation and you didn't have much time to think about impact? You know, perhaps you thought that, well, this is really important, our funders are asking for it, but we just haven't got the time to do it. Is there a lighter touch way that you'd recommend that partnerships can follow to support this process?
Yes, if you go to the website that I've put in the chat, and that was in the presentation, the visuals that I showed are there, and also a guide on how to do, say, a 2 or 3 hour workshop on that. So if you have a small team that's working on the partnership, or maybe a few different organizations and one person per organization, then hopefully you can find 2 or 3 hours to get together and discuss these things. Once off, ideally maybe every half year or every year or something, and then you can look back. And I think even with such minimal time input, it is helpful to consider the impact intention and how you're actually progressing, to learn from that and to be able to communicate it, for example, to the donors.
Great, fantastic. So even if you have minimal time, there's still something that you can do on this that's still worthwhile. Great, thank you. I've got a question here from an anonymous attendee who thanks you for your presentation, Susanna and Darian. And they want to ask Suzanne, is there any quantitative social impact or social return on investment tools used to assess impact in partnership? Is there anything that you'd recommend particularly?
Very good question. You can tell that I have to think about that. Feel free to send me that question again via email, and both myself and also our university colleagues who were involved can probably give you actually an even better answer than me. Because there are tools, but from the top of my head, I wouldn't be exactly sure where to point you. If others in the audience have an answer on quantitative social impact or social return on investment tools and where to find them, feel free to put that in the chat, or maybe Darian or others here. If anybody has a direct idea, then please let us know. And otherwise, I'm happy to answer that via email as well later.
Great.
I think all I'd add to that is that those type of tools are not specific really to partnerships at all. So the idea is that with any sort of investment, with any sort of social return on investment, you can pretty much use any of the tools, just search for them. What is different about what Suzanne and I are sort of presenting is really trying to understand how partnerships are able to deliver things in ways that sort of traditional approaches might not. But the tools for measuring the social impact could still be exactly the same, the final sort of social impact. And then there's just sort of need to be some adjustment, I guess, to to understand what the total investment across all of the partners might be. But it could be as simple as just adapting pretty much standard social return on investment tools in that case.
Great, thank you both. I wonder, are there any examples that you could draw on that are publicly available of partnerships that have measured their impact or the added value in a way that you think is really effective and that others could learn from? Or is it something that tends to be done privately and not shared with the outside world?
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. Now it worked. Yes, the Alliance for Integrity is one really good example that we were working with and who used the impact pathway just as I showed it, and to actually publicly put the result on their website, because they found it very useful in order to show what they're doing at what level and what they hope to achieve. I will look up the website in a second and put it in the chat as well, because it's a really nice example. But there are, of course, others also using different kinds of tools, but that's just one that comes to mind. That's a global alliance working in different countries in the world, particularly on integrity issues, so anti-corruption and things like that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of organizations that have used the framework, there is a global partnership, and unfortunately the name has just escaped my head, but it's one of all the major child NGOs, World Vision, Save the Children Plan, etc., who have come together to see how they could work more collaboratively to be able to deliver greater impact together. And they've basically gone through using exactly this framework to look at what are the 8 or 10 ways in which they could create additional value, both at global level and at country level. Not sure if that is a publicly available document. I will have a look, and if it is, I will, of course, share it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, I'm conscious of time. Very sadly, we're approaching the end of our session. Darren and Suzanne, as you've been speaking, attendees have been furiously typing email addresses into the chat saying, can we see the slides? You know, we'd like to see a copy of these slides. I know our hosts are working away on a solution for that. It might be that they actually post the presentations to the website along with the recording. So rest assured, we'll make sure we get those to you. I'd like to thank all our excellent speakers for today, Susanna, Darian, and the panelists from the earlier session, and to all of you attendees for lending your attention and for your insightful questions. I wish you an enriching week, whatever your plans, and may your partnerships be impactful and trust-filled. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks so much. Bye all. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone.